In this episode, I'll be covering my history and experiences. My aim is to provide context for the episodes to follow, and I hope to provide insight to help others when dealing with relationship and social issues in their own lives. The timeline of events is correct, but as I won't be using any names, it may seem disordered. I've been in toxic situations subject to abusive behaviour, and I've caused pain, trust issues, and insecurities in others through unresolved issues in myself. I've made high-risk decisions, and I've dealt with the consequences of these. This show will represent a new path, a positive mindset, and a commitment to understanding the relationship with others and ourselves much better. I'd like to focus on making better decisions and keeping ourselves safe while minimising the damage we do, trying to find happiness and fulfillment. Welcome to the Social Wildlife. Right, here we are. Just want to start with a quick disclaimer. So the topics that I'll cover will be drawn from my life and the lives of the people around me. I don't pretend to have all the answers, and I don't claim that my advice or opinion is the only correct way to handle these things. I'm not going to be mentioning any names of people or businesses involved, and I'll never release this information privately. I'm not a medical professional, obviously, or a counsellor. Please do not make significant life-changing decisions based on my advice. Some of the things I choose to discuss will no doubt trigger some people, especially locally. To those people, if I've negatively affected your life, I am sorry. Part of this journey for me is taking ownership of my mistakes, both the new ones and the ones I've chosen to repeat. I encourage anyone who feels I've misrepresented the truth to contact me. If we haven't met, but you feel what I've said is offensive or wrong, please leave me a comment on any of my social platforms or send me an email and I will be happy to talk it through. So at the end of 2022, I had a few significant events which triggered a shift in my thinking patterns. One of these events has the potential to have a serious impact on my life and the lives of the people closest to me. Another of them has made me completely rethink the way I handle personal relationships. This year, I'm going to return to university to finish the psychology degree that I started in 2007, and I'm beginning study in philosophy with a focus on understanding our existence, moral decision-making, and building healthy relationships. I currently work as a paragliding instructor in Christchurch, where I grew up and will continue to live for the foreseeable future. As you might already know, my name's Josh Townsend. I was born here in Christchurch and had a very middle-class upbringing with a very supportive family. I wasn't an easy kid to deal with. I got up to a lot of mischief and developed an unhealthy codependent attitude in relationships pretty early. I'll run you guys through some of my history and situations that contributed to my dangerous risk-taking mindset up until recently. Keep in mind that I'll be talking about these situations based on the observations of my own emotions and behaviour and the behaviour of the people involved. Any people involved may have different views about how all this happened, but this is my truth. Keep in mind that some of this might sound intense, but it's a summary over a very long period of time. So my parents split when I was 11. Mum returned to study. She did social science at the Lincoln University. Dad continued working. He had been made redundant from telecom, but then he went on to start his own business. He took the breakup pretty hard, and I remember he used to take me out to play golf when I was a teenager. I did that for quite a few years. He was very supportive of me and my sister. But I remember one moment in particular where he was driving me out there and he was crying in the car. And as a kid, at about 11 or 12 years old, it's kind of a weird feeling seeing your parent upset. But as I got older, obviously, within the last 10 years or so, I kind of understand where he was at and why he was feeling the way he was. Yeah, I was a bit of mischief when I was younger. I was brought home by the police, I think, for the first time when I was about 13, 14. Me and mate had come over for a sleepover. We snuck out at about 12 o'clock and just went wandering the streets, as you do when you're that age, or as some people do. We were going to go to a girl's house up the hill, and we ended up walking up there, and I think it was far too late. By the time we got there, they'd all gone to sleep, but we threw a few rocks on their roof, and someone must have called the police anyway. As we were walking back down the hill, they stopped us and took us all home. But I do remember very vividly getting home, and the knock at the door, and mum opening the door, and I'm standing there with a cop, and just seeing the look of horror on her face. And then she had friends staying from the States as well, and I went to bed listening to her crying in the lounge. So yeah, it was quite a moment that I do remember, and I felt pretty shit about that. When I was about 12, 13, the way we got around, I basically skateboarded everywhere. I had a few mates that did that, and obviously you get up to a bit of shit when you're doing that kind of thing as well. We were skating in places we shouldn't be. We were stealing signs and all sorts of other things. I had a few antisocial mates at that time, and we kind of justified to ourselves that it was okay to help ourselves to the things we wanted. Taking stupid shit, really, just little things that 13-year-olds want. That was around the time that fireworks were legal when you were 14. So anyone 14 could buy fireworks, and that was kind of a month leading up to Guy Fawkes as well. So we used to do a lot of stupid shit with that. Blow up mailboxes and fire them at each other, and we'd break into old abandoned buildings. I remember there was one, as a bread factory. It's now a Countdown, and it used to be this old bread factory. We got in there and got a forklift going and drove it through walls and things. Anyway, I ended up moving in with mum full-time kind of when I was about 15, 16, and that really affected the relationship I had with my dad. I think he held a bit of resent for my mum for leaving him, but then when I decided not to live with him as well, it really affected the way he saw me. I only really repaired that relationship, or we repaired that relationship kind of in the last 5 or 10 years. My first significant relationships were when I was about 15 to 16. I had a couple of girlfriends who I kind of, at high school, it was pretty superficial, I think, at that age. You just find someone you're attracted to and you go for it. But yeah, both of them ended up hooking up with either one of my friends or their friends in front of me towards the end of the relationship. And I was pretty emotionally invested in those, as you are at that age. It was pretty heartbreaking. And I think it did set me up for a pretty bad mindset leading into my next relationship. So one night I was out, we'd been out, and I had got back home around midnight. I was with two of my mates, and for us the night wasn't over, so we were going to go for a walk. We wandered down the street from mum's place, and we got down maybe the end of her street, and there's a rest home that connected the street that we were on to the river, and you weren't supposed to walk through there, but we walked through. Anyway, one of my mates, who was a bit more destructive than me, broke a sign off its post, and this woman came out and she said she was going to call the police. She did. We only realised that she had once we had got further down the street and we saw police cars on the other side of the river with their little side lights on the top looking into houses, and I was thinking, oh shit, that's definitely for us. So we ran into the park and we waited in a bush, and we were there for about 10 minutes, and we saw a dog handler run past with a dog. So we were like, okay, shit, we've got to go. Ran out the other side of the park and started working our way up to, well, we didn't actually know where we were going, but we ended up near properties. And we walked down this little bank, and we ended up on a trampoline. We're sitting there and waiting, and then my mate comes running up and he says, oh, the police are coming, the dogs are coming. So we ran through someone's hedge and then through another house, and we ended up out on the street. Me and one of my mates kept running, and the one that was falling a bit behind, he ended up getting caught by the police and the dogs. So we made it home. It took us about 20 minutes. We made it home, went through properties and things to get there. And it wasn't until maybe about half an hour later we heard a knock on the door with a flashlight, and there was a police officer outside. And so we spent the night in the cells that night, and I got released. It was the first time I actually had spent a night in the cells. I was given curfew, I think, and a couple of other bail conditions, but I didn't respect them. And I think I was out and about maybe a week later, and they did a bail check on me, and I wasn't home. The next night, I had a whole lot of friends around at my place, and the police turned up and said, where were you last night? I said, I was here. He said, where were you? I said, I was in my sleep out. So he radioed back and confirmed, and they said, no, they checked the sleep out. So that was that. And I think it was Labour weekend or Queen's birthday weekend, so I spent, I think it was 2.5 days in the police cells. That was it was a bit of a wake-up call at that time. And when we went to court, my mate that broke the sign, I think he pleaded guilty. And I pled guilty, and I got diversion for it. But in hindsight, hadn't actually done anything wrong. I really didn't break anything. We shouldn't have been there. But my other mate had his dad there, and his dad was an accountant, and he had some good advice. He pled not guilty, and he got off. So in 2006, I made the decision with my best mate to start training. So we started going to the gym, and the first gym we signed up to was a public gym. It had a pool and things attached to it, and I think the membership was about $300 for a year back then. Which was pretty good. My first trainer was fantastic. He's a great guy. He said he'd seen bigger legs on a beach chair. So yeah, we made it a lifestyle, and probably overkill, to be honest, with a lot of what we did. We were pretty obsessed. We ended up watching a lot of videos and things on bodybuilding, and we would do things like put 6 or 7 egg whites into a glass of orange juice and drink it after the gym, or we would make huge shakes after the gym that had far too much carbohydrates and protein and things in it. But we were committed to getting results, and both of us were about 60 kilos. I'm 6'1", so at 6'1" and 60 kilos, I was pretty skinny. And it took me a good 5-10 years to put on my first 15 to 20 kilos. And then I was able to maintain that for a while pretty easily. It was definitely it was a lot of hard work to do that. I'm an ectomorph. My body type is naturally very thin, which is great because I don't store fat like at all ever, but I find it very hard to put weight on, and then very hard to gain any muscle. And if I do get sick or I don't train or I don't eat, I lose it very, very fast. So it's a lot of maintenance to maintain any weight that I put on. Doing that did wonders for my self-esteem. I mean, at that time, I remember my best mate saying to me that he felt like a big guy in a small guy's body, and I know that feeling. I think over that period of time, we were really committed to being in really good shape, and it wasn't. There was a bit of ego. There was a lot of ego in it, I think, at that time. But realistically, we just wanted to be fit and healthy and strong. And I think a lot of men do want that. I think both men and women should aspire to be healthy, and physical strength and fitness is essential for maintaining health right through your life. I mean, I recently injured my back pretty badly, turning on my electric blanket of all things, believe it or not. But when I went to the chiropractor, he said to me, obviously you go to the gym and train pretty hard. He said, just keep that up because that's the thing that's going to prevent injuries in future. And that's something that I've been aware of for a long time, but it's a reason that I'll always be committed to living the most healthy lifestyle that I can. My first real serious relationship was with a girl who went to a completely different type of school to me. I went to a public school. She went to a private school, and it's just a very different mindset, I think. Her school was single sex, whereas mine was co-ed. And for me, meeting someone who went to that type of school, I felt like a real outsider. We met at a party, and at the party, there was some kids turned up that were pretty rough. I remember looking at one of them and seeing that he had scarring all over his knuckles, and he's sitting there looking like he didn't want to be there. He was just had this permanent nasty look on his face, and I remember thinking, something's going to kick off here. Anyway, there was a big fight out on the street, and I went out, and there's two friends of mine were out there, and they asked me to walk them back inside. So I was walking these girls back inside. As I was walking them inside, this guy who I'd seen earlier came running out, and while at pace, swung around one of the girls and punched me straight in the mouth. I didn't get knocked out, but I remember just a flash of white, and I walked over to the fence, and I kind of was expecting to spit my teeth out, but he had knocked all my bottom adult teeth loose, and it probably took about 2 weeks for them to come right, for them to settle down, but thankfully I didn't lose any of them. Carried on the relationship with this girl that I'd met at that party, and there was those differences in us. I could tell that they were there, and I overlooked that, but it meant that I don't think I took the relationship as seriously as I should have at that point. She did say some pretty out there things, like she said she saw me as a blank canvas, that she didn't want to be the trophy girlfriend of a boy at the male equivalent of their school. So I think there's these single-sex private schools and kind of like brother-sister schools going on. She was very critical of me, the good and the bad things. She encouraged me to cut my hair. I had like a 90s part at that time, and she encouraged me to buy better clothes and wear cologne and things, which I'm grateful for because I really needed to do that. And she convinced me to stop smoking as well, which I was doing at the time. She was very dedicated to her friends and very thoughtful, very driven and honest, and I'm sure she still is. It ended in a pretty nasty way. I mean, like for me, I admittedly hadn't taken the relationship as seriously as I should have all the way through, but I was a few years older than her and decided to go to university in 2007 when she was going to university, and she was going with her whole year group. So the experience for her was quite different. My mates and things were all 2 years ahead, and they'd done all the social stuff, whereas she was getting stuck into that with her friends. And when she went to uni, she met a guy in one of her lectures. He was 6'9", he was a kickboxer and pretty violent guy. Anyway, they started texting, and I hit her up about it a few times, had a big argument about it with her, left her house, and then when I returned to her house a couple of hours later, he was there. That was the beginning of the end with her and I. But basically, for the next year, she strung me along telling me that she just needed time and she needed to think about things and whatever else. But every time I walked into the uni library, they were sitting together. And back then there was no Facebook or Instagram or anything, but there was MySpace and Bebo. And I remember seeing on their two social pages, like they were leaving each other comments and all sorts of shit. And I was like, oh, this is just not good. Anyway, it was about a year of hell getting strung along there. And then eventually I kind of accepted that, but I needed to get away. So what I did was I joined the army. And for me, that was a bit of an escape, but it was something that I had wanted to do for a long time. It was a lot of cold mornings. It was a lot of getting thrashed in Waiuru for no apparent reason. And, I'll dive more deeply into that in another episode. But the army really changed my ability to be okay on my own and gave me a lot more personal discipline. It gave me a good group of friends. It taught me about rank structure. I think it actually probably did a lot of parenting that wasn't done. But that's not to say my parents did a shit job. I just mean there was probably things I needed and a level of discipline I needed and interaction that I needed that I probably didn't get as a kid. So yeah, spent 3 months up in Waiuru, came back, did another 6 weeks on a condensed core training for the infantry here. And then I got my Red Diamond and was a grunt for about 2 years before I went part-time. Thought I was going to go back to study, but basically kept on as a part-time soldier. Did some work in the earthquakes here, and yeah, it was a really good experience. After I got off that 6-week core training, I started talking to my ex again. She had problems over the last year or so with the guy that she'd met at uni. They were in a full-blown relationship at that point, and then I think she still had a personalised plate on her car that indicated both their names. But she came out to camp a few times, and she came out, watched movies and things like that, and I indicated to her that I was obviously still interested in seeing her, and I just got the feeling from her that she was just wasting my time again. So what happened was I was in town and I was out with friends and I met this girl and kind of kicked things off with her, had not talked to my ex for a wee bit, and then I was working at a bar in town at the time. This is pre-earthquakes in Christchurch, so it was quite a different nightlife to what it is now. There was a big bar that everyone will know, and I was working there. I was standing on the stairs and basically looking out over the dance floor to see or to spot intoxication and shine a laser on them and someone would come and grab them. Anyway, the new girl that I was interested in, she comes in and she's on the dance floor and she's getting pretty drunk and she's there with her mate. And I'm watching, and the next minute I look, one of the soldiers that's in my unit has her up, holding her underneath her ass, like she's basically riding him, and she's looking at me, and I was like, that is over, like, no way, that's the end of that. Anyway, she comes up to try and talk to me on the stairs. I was like, get out of my face. Her and her mate both tried to talk to me. I was like, no, I'm not having it, go, I'm not talking to you. Anyway, so she leaves, and I get these missed calls from her that night, and then missed calls in the morning, and my ex messages me. And she says, hey, I've heard that you're seeing this new girl. I thought you're interested in working things out. Do you want to come and talk to me? So I say, okay, yeah, that's fine. So I go meet her at the uni library and we sit in the car park and she's crying. And I remember this as a big moment. Like, I was looking at her and I was thinking, this is what I have wanted for years. Like, basically, well, for a year and a half. Since we split up, all I had wanted was to sort things out with her. And I had that opportunity in this moment. And something in my brain said, nah, that is not a good idea. But I chose the girl that had just been riding my mate on the dance floor. And I said to my ex, nah, look, it's not happening, sorry. And I left. And I actually felt reasonably confident in that decision. Anyway, I sorted things out I went around the next day and I sorted things out with the new girl that I'd met. And she has been the most supportive person I think I've ever met in my life. She's the mother of my son. And yeah, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. So my mate and I had been going to the gym at this point for a good 3 years. And there was a point where we basically thought to ourselves, okay, what's the next step we can take now? We're already taking supplements. We're already training as hard as we can. We're pretty disciplined with our timings. We're always there. I mean, we had been working a really labour-intensive landscaping role together for a year, and every day after doing that all day, shoveling gravel and planting trees and things, we went to the gym, and sometimes we were there for an hour and a half. So yeah, we decided, okay, we're going to take that next step, and we reached out to someone we knew who could provide steroids, and we managed to get, for I think it was $180, a vial of testosterone and nanthate. Now this is injected weekly, and we'd never done it before, and so we we did a lot of research on it beforehand, and we kind of like looked up what the real nasty ones were to take and what the best ones were to take. And all the oral ones are really bad for your liver, and all the injectable ones are they're all bad for you, but the injectable ones are less liver toxic. So we made the decision to do that. We took them. I think I took them. Did like a 10-week cycle, and I think I gained almost 10 kilos in that time, and that was huge, like especially for me, having never been able to gain weight very easily. That was a lot of weight to put on, and I felt a lot bigger and a lot stronger. It was a real shock. We were looking at the vial, and I remember my mate saying, "This does not look like it's made professionally or overseas," and we realized that it was made here. So what I did is I got online and I looked up the different chemical supply websites, and I found a supplier that supplied the raw ingredients, and I was like, oh, this is a powder. That's strange. And then I looked online, and there's all these different recipes on how to, because in a lot of countries around the world, it's not classed as a restricted drug. I mean, it's a prescription medicine here, so it is illegal to have without a prescription. But in the States, it's a class drug, so you would get heavy penalties for having it without a prescription, whereas here, it'd probably just get taken off you. Obviously quite different if you're selling it or manufacturing it. Anyway, I looked online, found this powder, and I think they wanted, it was something like 1,200 New Zealand dollars for the kilo, and I did some rough calculations, and I was like, oh, shit, so from a kilo of powder, I could make 400 vials up. I was like, $1,200, that's just ridiculous, that's too good to be true. So I actually got a loan, and it was about 2,000 New Zealand dollars. Now, I purchased this kilo and didn't know anything about the customs process or anything like that. I had never ever bought something from overseas and had to import it. So purchased it not knowing what would happen. It came through customs, and to me at the time, without looking anything up further, I was quite naive, and I thought, okay, well, if they let it through, then it must be okay to import. I didn't know that they're only stopping a percentage of the packages that come in. So I mean, they can't screen everything. And when this arrived, I didn't really know what to do with it. I looked up the instructions and things. It took me a very long time to make. I did very small amounts at once. And I mean, you're getting an oil from the supermarket and mixing other chemicals in with it with something you've just imported from overseas. Injecting that into yourself is probably one of the scariest things I've ever done, and probably one of the most stupid things I've ever done. I mean, that powder could have been anything. But yeah, I did it, and I realized that we had something there we could make a lot of money on. I mean, you'd effectively sell or turn that $2,000 into 40 or 60,000 bucks, depending on what you want to sell it for. So there was a real lure there to sell it, I guess, to fund the habit, but also you realise that there's just so much money to be made. Anyway, got on that buzz, kept making it and selling it, and it was just really to friends and people I knew. I didn't want to reach out to anyone anything further. Me and my mate were planning a supplement business at that point. It was it was all emerging here. It wasn't as the industry wasn't as flooded or saturated as it is now. So we started planning that, and then I was working at Les Mills at the time. I'd got a job there out of the army and was working as a membership consultant, and I worked there for about 6 months. I got trained up. Things were going good. We got into the new year in February and started meeting targets, and then the earthquakes happened and destroyed the club that I was working at. After that, my best mate, he left, moved to Auckland, and I guess at that point my social circle and things changed quite heavily. He was probably the person I spent the most time with, and after that I kind of had to reach out to other people. I mean, he'd been in my life as my best mate since I was 5 or 6. So that was a big adjustment. At that point, I was still with this new girl that I'd met at the club. She was my partner. We'd been together coming up maybe 2 years at that point, or a year and a half. And she had health conditions that could prevent her from having kids. And she'd said to me when I first met her that, having a child was the most important thing to her. And that she even said to me that if she had to, she would leave me. If I didn't want to have kids, she would leave me, and she would need to find someone who did. Her health conditions were that basically was told by a doctor to start trying to have kids at 21. At this point, she was 23, 24. And I decided one day that I was going to do that for her. She'd been in hospital a few times for a few operations, and she was so supportive of me and anything I wanted to do. And in that moment, I remember thinking, like, yeah, I want to do this for her. And to be honest, I don't think I was ready to have a child, but it was important to me at the time to do that. And so she went on medication to make her ovulate, and I came off the steroids I was taking, and I got blood tests done, and I made sure that my sperm count was up and all that stuff. And we started trying to have a kid, and she got pregnant I think it was within 6 months. And she was terrified that she was going to lose that child. During that time, as I was exploring like a new social circle, I started getting more into like going out, socializing more, drinking. I wasn't in the army full time. It was less, my working situation was less strict. I was out often, and I was engaging in like recreational drug use, so having pills and things when I was in town. And that was the first time I'd ever done that. And I definitely got quite addicted to the socializing. So anyway, I was coming home I was coming home later. I was sometimes staying out most of the night. It was not fair on my partner at all. I was really letting her down, and something had taken over in me, and I think it was just an unlived part of my life. I hadn't done enough of the socializing stuff when I was younger, and suddenly having these friends that were doing it all the time and the opportunity to do it, it really did change how I saw things. And I felt guilty every time that I was out for a long time, or every time that I was coming home still drunk the next day, or these kind of things. And she just like stuck by me through all of that. And yeah, I got to the point where I was working in the mall after the earthquakes. When I got made redundant from these mills, I was working at a hair salon that my partner owned. So after the earthquakes, I was offered the front manager's role. That was a good opportunity for us to get more money out of the business, and I guess for me to be on a higher and more reliable pay packet. So while I was working in the mall, I met a girl in a clothes shop, and at the time I was kind of out there meeting people and getting to know people and things, and I think I just applied the same logic to it. I was just meeting people, and I'd find myself often in that clothes shop, because it was a male clothes shop, and I would buy clothes there, but I'd be chatting with her. Then I started to be really interested in her. I was, at the time, I had kind of put my life behind me, and I was just living outside of that. I was just living out in a bit of a dream world, and I made an effort with her, and I realized that I had these feelings for her. And my partner at the time was visiting her parents up in the top of the South Island, and I rang her, or I texted her, and I said to her, look, I don't think I can do this anymore. And I told her that I had been spending time with this new girl, and she basically said to me, look, I still want to work this out with you, do you want to work it out? And when she came back, I had that discussion with her, and I said to her, yeah, okay, like, let's do this. But I remember that whole night I just couldn't sleep, and I knew something wasn't right. And the next day I went and I sorted things out with with the new girl. This was kind of the start of a pattern of behavior in me that I would end up, like, I realized I wasn't satisfied in my relationship, and there was something I needed that was missing. And I was constantly looking for it. And because of my codependent habits, it was very hard for me to let old relationships go. So I would effectively start a new relationship while letting go of the last one. But there would always be this overlap. And that is just one of the most toxic, harmful things that you can do to someone. I've experienced that firsthand, and it sets you up for the ultimate guilt for such a long time. And it does a massive amount of damage to the relationship. That new person that you're dating will never get that trust back. So this new relationship, unsurprisingly, was extremely volatile. I didn't realize it, but I believe she had quite serious insecurities and behavioral issues. And the way that they came out was, if she felt insecure, she would want to go out. She would act flirtatious in town. She would do that on purpose in front of me to try and wind me up. And she was reasonably violent. Like, I was exposed, I guess, to a lot more violence in that relationship than I had been before at all in my life. And I feel like it was kind of normalized. That led to a new social circle, which I think was even worse for me. And while I was in this group, I was exposed to more drug use and a lot more heavier drinking culture. So I was already importing steroids and selling those, and it was to a completely different group. I decided that the drugs that I could see around me were the kind of thing that was in demand, I guess, for my current circumstances. And I thought, well, I can just import that. I didn't want to import anything that was like I knew was illegal. So the drugs like MDMA or anything like that, I didn't want to even touch that. I knew that was just such a risk and there was no way I was going to do that. But a couple of years beforehand, legal highs were around and they were in Cosmic Corner and things like that. And some of the sports supplements we were taking had a product called DMAA in it. It's dimethylamylamine is what it's called. And it's a stimulant. It's quite close. It's actually an amphetamine analog. It's quite close to an amphetamine. And that's banned now. And so are the party pill ingredients. But one of those party pill ingredients was a drug called methylone or BKMDMA. And I think it was one of the original ones that was sold here as a legal high, and it was the one that online everyone was saying was amazing or the closest to real ecstasy. So I was like, okay, well, that's the kind of thing that I'd probably try and import. And I'd say, okay, well, is it available? And at this point, just remember, I mean, Customs, as far as I was concerned, Customs had let my package of testosterone through. So I was like, well, surely they'll just stop it and send me a letter or something if I'm not allowed it. And so I imported 100 grams of it, 200 grams of it. And it came to different addresses. One was my post office box in a mall, and the other one was my partner's house. And so one morning I was at her house and I think I just had a coffee and I was about to leave, and I look out the window and here's police and customs and everything just coming in the gate. And I was like, oh, okay, this is not good. They come inside, they say they've got a search warrant and that it's in relation to an import. So my partner takes her kids to school and I sit there with the police and I give them my version of what I had done. I was charged. I went to court, and when I got to court, I was about to plead guilty, and the duty solicitor said to me, I think you should probably see a lawyer. These are reasonably serious charges. And I was like, okay. So talked to a lawyer. He said I'd plead not guilty and I'd get a sentence indication. So I did that. I got a sentence indication. It was like a 3-year imprisonment sentence, and it was a starting point, and I was absolutely just didn't even know what to think. Got some more legal advice, entered a guilty plea, and got given a 9-month home detention sentence. So this took a bit of time to go through the courts. It was, I think, probably a 9-month period or something, maybe a little bit longer between when I was charged or when I was raided and when I was convicted and sentenced. And during that time, a lot of my mates started to think I was a narc. So they started treating me differently in town and things. And I think it was fueled by one person in particular. But basically they were thinking, oh, he's just been charged with importing Class C. Why is he not in jail? Or why has nothing happened to him? And I think they just were blind to the fact the court process takes such a long time. Anyway, started dealing with all that. Got put on home detention. During the home detention sentence, I was pretty restricted. And it was a bit of a pressure cooker for me and the girl that I was seeing. So she had 3 kids, and up until that point, or up until the point where I was put on home detention, I had been really supportive of her and her kids. I'd been away with them on trips. I'd parented them. Their father at that point, he was having issues with my partner, and he was pretty non-compliant with what she needed. She's a fantastic mother and did everything for her kids, and I think that he had his reasons for being bitter, I guess, but a lot of the stuff he did was really unnecessary. I would end up going on these school trips and things like that, and I had really been made part of that family unit. I was trying to get my son custody of him, but felt really guilty about splitting him away from my ex, and just the whole situation was really playing with my mind. During this home detention sentence, things got far more volatile. I remember I was doing community work one day because part of my sentence was about 200 hours community work, and I came back from the place that I'd been working at, and my ex came home and she'd been at the gym with a guy we'd had a massive fight, I think, beforehand, and her heart wasn't in the relationship anymore. So I kind of was asking her what was going on with this guy, and she was very vague on what had happened, and some of the things she said didn't make sense. Anyway, this particular guy was actually a client of mine, and I was selling him gear. I was selling him steroids, actually, and I knew something after that was continuing on with them. They were, keeping in contact, and after that there became, because our relationship was quite toxic, a lot of pressure came on from her to get engaged. So that ended up happening, and then a lot of pressure came on from her to have another child, which was for her to complete her family, and I understand that need. She had her first child very young, and I think that there would have been a real drive to have a family unit. I know she suits that, and she works pretty hard to maintain that. So I think it's quite a realistic thing to want. I just wasn't in the right headspace at all to do that with her, especially having come freshly out of an old relationship with someone I had a child with, and this caused some big issues in us, and some of our fights got very physical. She was the first partner I'd had that had physically hit me, and she that probably happened on 6 or 7 occasions throughout our relationship, where I either got punched in the head or the face, or things thrown at me, things like that. So while I was on this home detention sentence with her, I was very restricted in income as well. And so what I thought I'd do is, I had steroids there that I was selling to people, and a bit of that. I wasn't going to take any risks with the Class C stuff that I'd imported. One day I was on Facebook and I saw an ad advertising clenbuterol. Clenbuterol is a weight loss drug, it's not a weight loss drug. It's actually a drug that is prescribed for bronchodilation, so it opens up your lungs. And another effect that it has is it causes an increase in metabolic rate. So your heart rate speeds up and your blood pressure goes up. And it's like, it effectively puts your body on adrenaline. And it's got quite a long half-life, so it's in your system for, I think it's up to 48 hours. So there's versions of this drug that are used in humans, like albuterol, I think, is one of them, and it's it might be an asthmatic medication. But clenbuterol is actually used in horses, and a lot of people do use it for its weight loss properties. I personally would never recommend to take anything illegal, but I would not recommend taking that as a drug. It's a horrible thing to be on. You're shaking all the time. I took too much of it one time, and my blood pressure was so high that my ears were ringing, and my partner at the time said she could feel my heart rate through the bed. So it's a really dangerous thing to be messing with. But anyway, at the time, I was oblivious to a lot of this, and was looking to kind of like get new things, find what else was available. And I saw this ad on Facebook for this clenbuterol, and I thought to myself, I'll see if I can get some of that. Now, it's normally, if it's made in an underground lab, it's normally in liquid, it's not in pills. And it's, as an active ingredient, it's actually got very low, it's very potent. So it's kind of on the same scale as like LSD. It's in the micrograms. It is tiny, tiny, tiny amounts that you need to get any kind of effect. So I realized if I could get a powder of this, it would go a long way. And I managed to find a supplier, which was very, very hard to do. And again, this is a prescription medicine, but I thought, even though Customs had just charged me with importing a Class C drug, I thought, well, they'd let the medicine through, so that must be okay. So I attempted to import, I imported a 10-gram amount of it first. And then I thought to myself, well, I don't have the market for this. I don't have the people to sell it to on that scale. And then I realized, oh, well, this guy's advertising on Facebook. Maybe I'll advertise on Facebook. So created a website and advertised on Facebook. And when I started advertising on Facebook, I think the sales were in my first week were about $1,000. The second week they were maybe $3,500, and then after that it didn't go under $10,000 a week for about a year and a bit. So I'll go into this again in a lot deeper in another episode, but that basically changed my lifestyle quite considerably. And when I got off home detention, the social circle that I was kind of spending time with, I felt, saw me as someone different. They saw me as someone who had money and was doing things. And that's when I started to notice a lot of the fake friends and a lot of the people that were actually extremely jealous of my situation, and I'd get hostility from, I could see the social situations changing. I was like, oh, this is different. This guy's got a problem with me now. And whereas before he didn't recognize me as a threat at all. So basically our relationship had got really toxic, and I had said to her, I actually spoke to corrections and said, I need to move out of this house. This is going to be bad. At the time I could afford, because I had the money, I could afford to rent on my own. So I rented this house up on the top of the hill. It was great. I bought myself a whole lot of furniture, and everything I needed to be up there. And then I had this really unhealthy attachment to my ex, and it was probably an attachment more out of the jealousy and the insecurities that I'd felt through all the toxic situations in our relationship. I knew it was unhealthy, but I couldn't leave. I didn't want her to be with anyone else. It was just, the thought of that was just so horrific. And so when I moved into this new house up on the hill, I ended up letting her move in with me, which was just there's just no point in moving out in the first place. But she moved up there, and it wasn't great for the kids and things. It didn't really have a yard or anything like that. And we were up there one day, and I think I'd got Snapchat, and I'd had it for a wee while, and I basically had added someone that I knew on Facebook on there. And anyway, she accepted my friend request, and she said to me, "Is this Josh?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Oh, are you still with so-and-so?" I said, "Yeah, I'm still with her." She said, "Oh, I thought something happened with her and this guy that I knew." And I was like, "Oh, that makes sense," because she was going to the gym with him, a few months ago. And she said, "Oh," I said, "What did you hear happen?" And she said, "I heard that they slept together." And so I turned to my partner in bed and I said to her, "Hey, did this happen? Did you sleep with this guy?" And she said, "No, I told you no." And I said, "Well, I'll just ask him." And so she got out of bed, stormed out of bed, and went downstairs. Anyway, I got a text back from him. He said, "Yeah, bro, I'm sorry. We did. I felt real bad about it." He was completely upfront with me, and I'll always give him so much credit for that. In those situations, I think if you have done something like that and someone hits you up, the best policy is always to tell them. I mean, yeah, had I not known, I don't know how much longer that would have gone on, that situation with her. Anyway, I confronted her about it, and she basically blew up at me, took her kids, and left. I was pretty wrecked at that point, and I think to a certain degree, I probably deserved it. With some of the things that had happened, or some of the things I'd done previously, it was the first time I think that I'd had that level of breach of trust done to me. And so, like, even the stuff that happened with my ex at university, that was kind of like, sure, there was something going on. I didn't know about it, but we broke up, and then whatever that was started. In this situation, it was a little different. After that, I definitely had a very unhealthy emotional attachment to her, and still felt I didn't want her to be with anyone else. I asked her to come back and stay with me. She moved in and out quite a few times, even to the point where at one point I gave a family member of hers 20 grand to hold on to, and I said to her, "If I kick you out again, that's yours to set yourself up. I won't do that again." But I was really messed up. I mean, I was doing it often. I would welcome her back. I couldn't sleep. I would hit her up about what had happened. She would get frustrated with that. We'd have a fight, and I would kick her out again. I think this was kind of the start of a level of PTSD that I had that I wasn't aware of. And when I finally kind of like wanted to end it for good, there was a point where I was still on home detention at this point, and I was living in the house up on the hill that I was renting. And I think it was Valentine's Day. She came round. We were talking. She had brought me something. I think she brought me a flower and maybe some chocolates or something like that. And I basically said to her, "Look, I can't do this anymore. It's not going to happen." And she knew at that point that while I was on home detention, I was still offending. So I was still selling these medicines online. And when I told her that was it was over, I remember her saying to me, "Well, I'm not going to watch you move on. I would rather you were in prison. So I'm going to go to the police and tell them everything you've been doing." And I remember just sitting on my bedroom floor and hearing her say that, and just feeling so powerless and so broken, and just like I had no options available to me. I said to her, "So you would rather that I was with you and miserable than to let me be happy and move on, and both of us move on from the situation?" She said yes, and she went to leave, and I stopped her leaving the house, and I couldn't leave the house, and I was terrified. I thought, she's going straight to the police station. She's going to tell them everything that had been going on, and it's over for me. So I got my mate round. He had a chat with her. He talked to her for about an hour, and then he came downstairs and he said, "Look, I've talked to her. She's not going to go to the police, but you guys just need to kind of leave each other alone." I said, "Yeah, that's fine." And I realised how kind of serious it was at that point. It wasn't the end of it, but I ended up having her back at the house again. And when I got off home detention, I had basically organised a party where I was going to catch up with a lot of friends, and I'd invited people. I was single when I invited people to that. So I had about 20 or 30 people that were going to come round, and some of them were girls that I'd met recently. And I sorted things out with her just before that party that I was organising. And so I had to kind of restrict the amount of people that turned up. But then I had the party, she was there, people came round, and one of the people that came round brought some friends with him. And two of those people that came were girls. One of them was a girl who I remember as soon as I opened the front door and I saw them, I remember just everyone else just went blurry, and I saw this girl at the back and I was just like, oh my God, who is that? Like, she was hands down, at the time to me, she was just the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. And I thought, okay, I need to, my whole focus after that night, and being this in this kind of codependent mindset, I was trying to let go of my existing relationship. I was trying as hard as I could. I still had this really unhealthy emotional connection to her, but this new opportunity had just presented itself, and I was looking for emotional connection. I was looking for someone to be there, and obviously the first thing you end up noticing about someone is how they look. And I thought, this girl's beautiful. And my whole night became about her. It definitely wasn't fair on my ex, who was there as well. And I remember at about halfway through the night, we'd gone into town, she wanted to leave, and she ended up basically blowing up at me and saying, I'm leaving, and she left. My night was still based around this new girl. I ended up spending a lot of time with her over the next few weeks. We did a few different activities together, so took her on the motorbike, went to Akaroa, went to the gym a few times with her. My ex was still living with me at this point, and I didn't know what to do. I felt very trapped. I was afraid to leave her because I felt she would go to the police, and I didn't know what else she'd do. I mean, even her sleeping with someone else or being with someone else was a hard thing for me to accept. So I stayed in that situation and I repeated the same mistakes from the previous relationships. I basically started something new with someone new while I still had this old baggage that was effectively still in my life. And this also was extremely unfair on the new girl. So one day I'd been to the gym with the new girl, and I was driving home. I had picked my son up. On the way home, I drove past my ex. Now, she was in the car with her kids, and she saw us. She turned around and she followed me. I remember being in the car and just thinking, oh, this is not good. I had to drop my son off at my mum's place, so I ended up going to my mum's, and as I went in the driveway, she followed me in, and I thought, this is going to kick off. This is not going to be good. So got out of the car, my ex was screaming at me. The new girl did not know what to do. Got her and my son inside, gave my son to my mum. My ex yelled at me, asked my mum what was going on, then yelled at me that, you wait, watch what happens. As she left, she smashed the wing mirror off my car, and I went back inside. I remember saying to my mum, what do I do? And your mum was like, you need to go sort that out. So by the time I got home, she had smashed everything out of the fridge all over the floor in the kitchen. She'd ripped curtains down. She'd drilled a hole in the tank of my motorcycle and pushed it onto its side in the garage. She was in the process of pulling the curtains and everything down in the bedroom. I went upstairs, tried to get her to stop, ended up restraining her and holding her by the wrists and basically holding her down on the bed and saying, you need to stop. Her daughter came in. She was saying to her daughter to call the police. I remember seeing her daughter holding the phone, shaking, looking at me, not knowing what to do. And I said to her, you can call the police if you like. I'm just trying to get her to stop smashing the house up. I don't know. After that, I think there was a break, and she continued living with me. But down the track, again, I managed to just smooth things over, even though I was miserable in that situation. And I bought a new car. So I bought a car, I was going to pick it up from Auckland, and I remember saying to the new girl, do you want to fly up there and meet me? She met me in Auckland. We spent time with my best mate up there. On the way down, I was getting phone calls from my ex who was living at the house, and I didn't know how to handle that situation. Again, I was pretty messed up in the head. A couple of weeks later, after that, the new girl kind of worked out that something wasn't right, and that there had been this contact with my ex constantly. Now, she didn't know that my ex was still living with me, and she hadn't really been to my house. So one day they got texting. I got home one day and my ex said, your new mate's coming up here to chat with you. And I was like, oh, great, here we go. This is not good. And I waited at home. The new girl turned up, and I had both of them grill me for probably a good 40 minutes. I remember my ex asking me, does she make you happy? And I remember saying to her, you know what? She does. This girl's made me the happiest I've been in a long time. And the new girl said to me, is that all you've got to say? I said, yes. She went upstairs, and then I heard smashing noises coming from my driveway. By the time I got upstairs, she'd smashed in my new Mercedes with a wheel brace. So This is a $54,000 car I just bought from Auckland, and she did about $15,000 to $16,000 worth of damage to it. I let that go. I let her go. She left with her mate and went downstairs. My ex said to me she was going to go stay with her mum, and so that was that. I put the smashed up car in the driveway, and my focus that night, being in my very emotionally compromised state, was just fixing things with this new girl. I knew I was so miserable in my relationship with my ex, and being so compromised, I just worked that night so hard on trying to fix things with the new girl. At the end of the night, I ended up back at her place, stayed there. The next day, went home, got ready, went out with her that night. We ran into my ex in one of the clubs in town. Nothing happened there. But when I got home the next day, my ex was at my house, and she said, my dad wants to talk to you. I said, that's fine. He can make a time to have a chat with me. She said, no, he's coming up to the house now. So I waited for him. He turned up. He came in the lounge. He verbally had a go at me and then came and stood over me trying to get me to stand up and fight him. He threw a few things around the room. And then before he left, I wouldn't get up off my chair. I said to him, I'm not going to fight you. And I mean, it's not the way I deal with these kind of things. But he said to me before he left, you need to listen to her. She's going to have a chat with you. She knows what we're going to do if you don't comply. So he left. She sat down. She said to me, between me and my dad, with what we know on you, we know a detective, and we're going to go to him and we're going to tell him what you've been up to. And he said, you'll get at least 8 years in prison. If you don't pay us $60,000, then we're going to do that. She knew how much money I had saved. At the time, I think I had about $120,000 saved in my safe upstairs. So I gave her 60 grand. And after that, I think she tried to extort me maybe twice more. On the other two occasions, I didn't comply. I wasn't. I didn't have the money at that point to pay her what she would be asking for, but I couldn't do it. There's just no way. But the damage had already been done. The damage to the new relationship was profound. Like, going through all of that, there's no way I should have tried to fix things with the new girl after she'd smashed my car up. I mean, that was it. I had seriously broken her trust. I had seriously hurt her. There is no coming back from that. But because I worked so hard on it and I made these promises and I said it was never going to happen again, in my current emotional state, I was not in a position to make those promises. I was not in a position to be reliable or stable or anything healthy for anyone at all. I had so much work to do on myself. I had so much baggage to deal with, and that's the point there in my life where, well, much earlier than that, but at that point I should have been on my own, working on my issues, working out what I needed, and then I wouldn't have dragged that new girl through absolute shit for the next 7 years. So after that, I was in the last few months of living at the house up on the hill. One morning, heard a knock at the door. There was 2 armed police officers there. They said they needed to come inside. They came inside. And then there was about 30 or so police officers that all came into the house, had another search warrant executed. I was basically told to stand outside, and then they brought me back inside and searched the whole house. Basically, the search warrant was executed by MedSafe. They had been on to the fact that I was selling medicines through the website for a few months. They were searching my house and my business address down in the city at the same time. So after the search warrant and everything was done, eventually I was given charging documents and I was charged with about 298 charges. They ranged from sale to manufacture to possession of medicines. That whole process took probably a good year and a half to go through the courts, maybe just over a year. So after the raid, I still had the office space that I had leased initially for the supplement business that I was looking at starting. My best mate at the time, someone I considered my closest friend, and effectively a bit of a mentor for me, he suggested to me that we start a business in the food industry, and I did that with him. I put around $60,000 into that. Because I had pending convictions or pending charges, we had a 50-50 agreement, and he was holding my shares in trust. That was an agreement between him and I. It wasn't on paper anywhere. And as time went on, I put more and more energy into this business. So I was doing 16-hour days some days. Was there very early and left late. It was going really well. The launch was looking really good. I did a lot of marketing material. We got Facebook presence. I think I got about 1,200 people on an email database for our launch. And when we launched the business, we were starting to get orders and things come in. We were just kind of working out the process of delivery. We'd had a wee bit of media attention, which was good too for our marketing. And then he came to me and suggested that we bring in another shareholder. He had someone who had shown some interest in it and was willing to invest. When he approached me, he said to me that, I said to him, oh, okay, so would we dilute down both our shares? He said, no, I want to retain 50%. So we'll dilute down your shares. For me, that was a bit of a shock. Obviously not what I was expecting. But I couldn't really do anything. I'd put myself in a position where I didn't have any control at all over the situation. So I just kind of accepted that. That's the way it was. The work environment became a bit hostile for me. I felt like I was losing any form of ownership or control over the business. The new guy that got brought in, his role seemed to be my role as well. He was brought in and he had all these ideas about marketing. That was what I was passionate about. I was really interested in marketing this business. So I started to feel like my ideas were being overridden by him and that was the way it was going. So it started to get quite negative for me and there was a massive blow up. Basically, I was told to leave and the next day I looked at my access to the I'd been locked out of everything, so I'd been locked out of the website, all that kind of stuff. I came back in a week, and my mate said to me, look, the other shareholders said it's you or him, and I knew what that meant. Got home, I was almost in tears. I'd been putting my life into that business for the 3 or 4 months before that, and it was very, very hard to deal with. So I walked away from that. They left me in about $8,000 worth of arrears in the lease, which I paid out. I think I had a loan, about a $10,000 loan for a chiller as well, which the bank ended up writing off, but that went against my credit rating. So I guess like in those kind of situations, it was my fault that I got myself into that situation, and that was a massive lesson for me in taking people at face value, trusting that they have your best intentions in mind. I don't know what the motivations were behind that. I can only assume it was financially related. Maybe he wanted to distance himself from me with the convictions, but I mean, as far as I was concerned, it wasn't a fair way to deal with that. The real salt in the wound was this guy went on to date my son's mother, and she told me on one occasion that he said to her that if she ever left him, he would put me in the boot of a car. So there's always going to be these people that come up, and he's reached out to me. When I got out of prison, he reached out to me, and he said to me that he wanted to catch up and wanted to chat and make amends. And of course I was open to that, but it never happened. These things end up fading into the distance. And I guess I would always work to preserve relationships with people. I certainly don't hold any animosity towards him now. I don't think he's a bad person at all. It was a massive lesson for me. And he's not the only person to have done that kind of thing. I've definitely had people take advantage of my generosity in situations, and I guess throughout my life I don't owe many people anything at all. I don't owe people money. I try not to borrow money from people. I try not to put myself in positions where I really owe people anything, and I try and look after my friends as much as I can. I know that's a very strong trait of mine. I've always welcomed people into my projects. I've always welcomed people into ideas that I have, because I know the benefit of working together, and I know ultimately I want to be able to share these things with people. So big lessons learnt there. I wasn't seeing my ex anymore. I'd started a relationship with this new girl. So a day or so after that, I got this no caller ID missed call on my phone, and then I heard this loud knock at the door. I went upstairs, opened the door, my ex burst in, she ripped my shirt over my head and punched me a few times in the head. Now, I restrained her. I'd got her down on her stomach and on the ground, and her friend came to the door, and she came running over to me, and I let my ex go. My ex went out the door. She got something out of her car. She smashed the back window out of my car, and then she drove off. Now, after this was the moment where I was like, right, I'm not doing this anymore. I'd already had that search warrant executed at the house. So I was kind of like, I've got the option here now. I need to call the police. So I called the police. They came round. They realised that she had smashed the window out of the car. They went and asked her what had happened. She told them she was arrested. She breached bail a couple of times. After that, she wasn't to contact me, and she was arrested once or twice more, I think. And then after that, it kind of went quiet. So I didn't hear from her for a long time. What I was aware of, though, is that after all this had happened, the police at one point dropped a business card off to her. So a cop went and checked on her, made sure she was okay, which highlights, I guess, in the situation, they viewed me as a criminal, which is fair enough, I was. But they had no idea the level of abuse that was going on. And they obviously treated her like she was a victim as well. And she was a victim to my bad behaviour, but I wasn't checked on once. No one rang me at that point to kind of make sure that I was all right. And mentally, I was really struggling. Emotionally, I was pretty fucked. after that happened, that was really the end of it. I didn't hear much else from her for a long time. And I moved out of that house. I moved into a new place in a different suburb. Things were going good. Then I heard from her again. So we got talking on one day, and she said, look, do you want to catch up and talk? So I gave her that opportunity, and I met her for coffee, and we did chat. Now, in that meeting, I asked her about some things that I'd heard, things that she'd done, and I found out that was true. And I was already completely put off by, and still recovering from, I guess, the abusive behaviour that I'd been through with her. But at that point, it was confirmed to me. It was final. I was like, nah, I am definitely not doing this. And when I left that situation, I think she was blocked. So she emailed me and she said, what do you want to do? You want to sort this out or not? And I said, no, that's it. I don't want to do it. That was the beginning of about 3 weeks of just an absolute tirade of abuse. So I think I got 500 emails in that time from her that ranged from just the most explicit abuse that you could think of, and stuff that was really designed to try and make me feel as bad as possible about myself. It got to the point where she'd turned up at my new place twice, and I one time was in front of my son and his mother, and my new partner was there as well. We could hear her car outside and things like that, and I thought, this is too much. Like, what do I do? So I applied for a protection order, and it was granted without notice. So in the protection order application, it actually said, evidence of physical abuse last year, evidence of significant psychological abuse. That was a bit of reprieve, and I didn't really hear from her at all after that. When it finally went to family court and things, she had filed a cross-protection order, and her lawyer claimed that she thought I would use the protection order to control her, which at the time I thought was laughable. I mean, I was not interested in controlling her at all. At the time, I really only applied for it to stop the psychological abuse that was happening. But I ended up dropping the protection order application. I didn't need it there. If she was just going to leave me alone, it was fine. But in this whole situation, while all of this was going on, at the time she was living with me, when I found out she had been unfaithful, she was about 4 months pregnant. She had had this child, and this is my daughter. I've got some very strong feelings around this situation. I don't see my daughter, and I haven't seen her since she was a baby. Now, my dad has custody. This has been done through the family court, so my dad is supposed to see her weekly. When this all happened, I went to victims' advisors. When the protection order application was made, they finally reached out to me and they said, what do you need for support here? And I said, I don't know how to deal with this situation. I want to see my daughter, but I don't know how to enter into this and keep myself psychologically sane. I was so emotionally broken, and I didn't want to deal with the hostility. The effect that it was having on my self-esteem and my ability to function was so serious at the time. Victims' advisors said to me, you don't have to engage in this right now. She will not forget who you are. You can come back to this at a later date. And I probably have let this go on far too long. At the time, I was dealing with the potential imprisonment of my medicines case. And when it was taken to family court, now my ex had made claims I was a meth addict, which is hilarious. I've never tried meth in my life. But the judge said to me, there is no point in granting you custody right now with this pending conviction. I asked him, can you grant custody to my father at minimum once a week or once every fortnight so that she knows that side of the family? And that was granted. Now, from what I know, the custody arrangement with them has been on-off. I mean, sometimes she's compliant, sometimes she's not. It's fantastic that she's allowed that to happen, but it is a judgment made by the courts. It should be happening regardless. Now, I haven't had active input in my daughter's life, and I want to have that, but I need to make sure that when I do re-enter her life, I do it permanently, that it isn't a temporary thing. So I also need to know that my ex is going to be reasonable, that the behaviour between her and I, or the interactions between her and I, are going to be amicable and that we can communicate, because if I enter into that situation and she is destructive or abusive or anything like that, my daughter witnesses that, other people witness that. It creates a very dysfunctional situation where I don't think it's healthy for anyone. So recently, over the last 5 years, I've had very minimal interactions with my ex. Recently, I was out at an event. I was at a bar in town and my friends were there, and one of them said to me, just don't react, it's okay. And I looked to my right and I realised my ex was there. She had been abusing me across the table for the last few seconds. Now, I tried not to react to it. I probably said a few things I shouldn't have. But since then, she has withdrawn custody or hasn't been compliant with my dad with arrangements to see my daughter. So it is a situation that is being worked out. And at some point there will be some resolution, but that's where we're at. Going into my new relationship, I was very quick to react or leave if anything went wrong. I picked up some very bad habits from my previous relationship, and over the years to come, I really did put her through hell. I wasn't honest about what I was doing or where I was going. I didn't have faith that the relationship would work. I did my best to be supportive of her. In a lot of ways, I believe I was a really good partner, but where I lacked was my honesty. I was nowhere near the reliable, safe partner that I should have been, and I had a huge effect on her emotionally. I still had quite a negative social circle leading up to the point where I was put in prison, and when I finally went to prison, that was a huge shock. And again, that's something I'll dive into in another episode. But leading up until that point and after that point, I had so much support from my partner and her family. They were fantastic. Before I was put in prison, there was an incident where I was driving home and my partner rang me and she said to me, "Are you at home?" I said, "No." She said, "Okay, I've just gone to your place and the police have blocked off the whole suburb. There's armed police on the corners." Anyway, I looked at my phone and I had a missed call from an unknown number, so I rang it back and the guy on the end of the phone said, "Hey, it's Detective so-and-so here. We're executing a search warrant at your house. Whereabouts are you?" Now, I was coming back from the Waimak River, and I said to him, "Look, I'm just driving back from the Waimak. I'll come and meet you if you like, or I can go into the Central Police Station." He said, "Okay, yep, just head to your place and make yourself known to the staff on the cordon, and we'll let you through." So got back, realised that was quite a big operation. They had fire engines and ambulances and tactical groups were there. And yeah, they'd blocked off most of the suburb. This was all due to something I was doing in the garage. And a neighbour had made a complaint, and because of my history, they basically thought that something real serious or sinister was going on there. But yeah, that was all resolved and nothing came of that. So yeah, shortly after that, in May 2017, I was locked up. That was quite a serious formative time for me, something I really struggled to adjust to at the start. It's probably the lowest point of my life at that point so far. I had fantastic support when I was in there. My mum, my grandparents and my partner visit me each weekend. Even my partner's parents made time to come out and see me. And after I was released, I lived with them for a good year, like a year and a half. They were incredibly supportive. I had my son there. I can't thank them enough for the support they provided me over that period. I did come out with a change of attitude. I had quite a serious change of attitude when I first got out, but I still had a lot of the baggage and a lot of the dangerous mindset in the relationship where my needs were not being met. And I didn't even know what those needs were. I tried my best. When I came out, I actually had quite bad social anxiety. So I would go to malls. I would start to feel stressed in shops. So like if two people were coming down the same aisle from either side, I needed to get out of there. I felt like I couldn't be around too many people at once. I overreacted to my partner. So at one point, I found out that she'd been spending a bit of time with a male friend of hers while I was in prison. That's something she hadn't told me about, and I completely overreacted to that. It wasn't fair at all on her. She was entitled to have friends and make friends, and I can understand why she felt uneasy telling me about that kind of stuff. So that was another thing I had to adjust to. Previously, I had just done so much damage in the relationship, way too much. There was no trust, there was no respect, and there was no empathy there. She did her best to trust me, and I know she respected me for certain things, but she was not empathetic to what I was feeling or what I was going through or anything like that. And I understand why, because I had become this monster, and I had damaged so much at the start. Those first impressions definitely last. I really had ruined things for us. I still wasn't aware of how seriously I was causing the problems. I thought that all I needed was the right person in my life, or all I needed was my current partner to change how she treated me. But I was the root of the problem. I had caused irreparable damage in my relationship, and I had so much work to do on myself, which, if I'm honest, could not be done while I was in a relationship. I needed to spend a lot more time on my own. The other issues that we faced was that, I knew she didn't want a child, and I already had a child. I couldn't do anything about that. She didn't like my family, hardly really made an effort with them. We spent a lot of time with her family, and I did need someone in my life who was going to make an effort with my family. I mean, I love my family. They have been just so supportive of me over the years, and I know a lot of people will think that the way they've been raised is right. I mean, she was very open about the fact she didn't like the way I'd been raised. She didn't like the fact I came from a split family. She didn't like at one point she told me she did not like my son. And I guess at that point that should have been a red flag for me. It was, but I wasn't. In hindsight, that should have been a tipping point. Just like I'm sure a lot of my behaviour should have been tipping points for her. It really should have. But you know what it's like. You stay in these situations, even though you know they're not right for you, or you know they're not fair. So yeah, it's not always easy. Over the COVID period, things were made more intense. So we lived together, and we hadn't been properly living together for a long time. She had basically been set up at her parents' place and was staying with me quite often. But when we lived together, that's when a lot of the pressure came on. I still had these real unmet needs. I didn't have a lot of faith in the relationship lasting. I was trying to protect myself to a degree, but I was still causing more damage, continuously causing more damage. I had a female friend who was struggling with a meth addiction, and I would spend time with her reasonably regularly over a short period of time, and that was something that I wasn't honest with my partner about. When that did come out, it caused another huge rift in our relationship and added to the trust issues that were already there. But that for both her and I, that was a bit of an escape, I think, from our current situation. And the fact that in hindsight, looking back, knowing that I needed to escape should have been a big indication of how seriously broken I was. Towards the end of the relationship with her, when I tried to leave, it wasn't something that she was willing to let me do, and there was a lot of threats, and there was a lot of she was very upset, and I knew it was best, and I was trying to do that, but she felt I was abandoning her, and it was the last thing I wanted to do. I genuinely wanted to be with her, and I wanted things to work, but it just was never going to, and I couldn't make the changes that I needed to make because I didn't have the faith in the relationship working. Towards the end, what I did was I tapered off contact with her, and I tried to encourage her independence, and I kept saying to her that I needed her to be happy on her own and choose to be with me, that I didn't want her to feel she had to be with me, that there was this, I didn't want this codependent mindset that we both had effectively at that point. After being on and off for years, we finally got to that point, and we did finally split. I felt she seemed comfortable on her own, or seemed to be. I wasn't hearing from her as much, and she had a new job and things were going really well. I wasn't over the relationship, and definitely wasn't ready to start dating, but I did. I had one person reach out to me, wanted to spend time with me, and I spent time with her. I was adamant that I was not going to get into a relationship, and everyone I spoke to, everyone I met over that year, I guess it was, I said to them, look, I'm pretty broken, I'm working on myself, I can't do a relationship at the moment, but I am interested in meeting people and getting to know you. The problem was I was seeking emotional connection, but I was very closed off. And what I did was, even though I told them I wasn't looking for a relationship, I was not honest about the fact that I was dating multiple people at once. What happened was, over a period of time, I would get to a point where I had progressed into the relationship enough, and then I would back out of it. And I did that with quite a few people over that year. And I must have caused some real confusion and really hurt some people. But with a select group of those people, I actually let things go too far. And what happened was they ended up finding out about each other. And again, I was put back into the same kind of situation that I had put myself into previously in other relationships, where I had jumped from one to the next to the next. And this time I wasn't in a relationship, but I had effectively misled people. And during this whole process, my ex, who I thought was fine on her own and was doing well, was not over the relationship and was hoping and expecting that I was going to stay in contact. And I did, to a degree, over that period of time. I messaged her every now and then. I wanted to make sure she was okay. I reached out. And in the back of my mind, of course, I would have loved things to work with her. But I got to this point where she contacted me. She asked me if I'd been dating. I said yes. And then contact from her stepped up big time. I wasn't ready for that. It was quite unexpected. And again, I continued the same unhealthy patterns. I wasn't honest with her after that I was still dating other people. I found it very hard to break things off with any of the people that I was seeing, because I didn't want to hurt anyone. I had this mindset, and I still have it, where I don't want to hurt people. I find it very hard to hurt people in the moment. And what happens is I end up making things much worse by carrying things on too far and then having to hurt them later on down the track, or they are hurt by my actions. I'm very prone to feeling guilty in those situations, and I need to say I do have so much love and respect for the people that came into my life during that time. I have so much appreciation for the understanding and support that they gave me, and they'll know who they are. Now I'm just working out what I need. I won't be rushing into anything, and I'm making sure that I don't end up in a situation where I feel unfulfilled, because I don't want to repeat the same mistakes that I have made in the past. I'm very lucky to have the support of family and friends and the sacrifices that people have made for me over the years. I've learned some big lessons, and I'm very grateful for that. Since starting study in 2007 and mum recommending that I study science, that was when I was introduced to psychology. Since then, I've kind of developed a passion for it, and I guess it started with friends approaching me, asking me questions about certain situations, and the way my brain works, I just ended up getting really stuck into whatever the problem was that they had. As time's gone on, I've noticed that I do really have a passion for it, and understanding relationship psychology and social psychology is really the most important part of that for me. On this podcast, I'll be releasing episodes weekly, sometimes in a mini-series, and I'll be covering topics such as taking ownership, criminal behaviour, coping with stress and adversity, toxic relationships and social interactions, emotional triggers, vulnerability, drug use and addiction, anxiety and depression, building self-confidence, health, fitness and well-being, and recognising antisocial or harmful behaviour in yourself and others. These podcasts will be hosted on Apple, Spotify, Amazon and other providers. Make sure you subscribe, give me a rating. I will be doing interviews every now and then. I will try and link up with other hosts as often as I can. I'll also be doing episodes to respond to feedback and questions, so feel free to leave me messages or comments on social platforms, email. I'll be on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I appreciate you being here. As I've said, these are the topics that I'm passionate about. Definitely not an expert on them, but I am committed to understanding them better. If you do have any issues with what I've said, please do contact me. Like I said, I will do my best to set it straight. And just one final note, I know opening up can be hard. I know admitting fault can be hard. I definitely did find it hard and do find it hard. To grow, we do have to get out of our comfort zone, and healing from the past does take time. It's our responsibility to do that. No one else can do the work for us. It is an ongoing journey, and we only know what we know at any stage of our life. So don't be too hard on yourself.